So we're going to start with what everybody thinks of when they think of the wedding industry, the planner, the wedding planner. Um, Typically the person that stays with the couple or through the entire process and coordinates the wedding day and makes sure everything goes very smoothly during that period. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you are drafting for wedding planners, usually you're only going to be making one contract that they're going to reuse over and over and over and over and over. So this contract needs to be flexible. It needs to be easily modified and easily understandable. And you need to make sure that the planners know, and any vendor for that matter, they know what can be changed and what has to stay the same in that contract. So when you review your contracts after you draft them and after your client comes in to talk to you, you need to sit down with them and go through it. Don't just send it to them by email. Make sure they know what stays and what can be changed. The first important thing when you're dealing with planners is that you need to have a detailed scope of the work that they are going to be doing. As I said before, a lot of times you're dealing with your client's going to be using contracts that are a year, 2 years long, and they don't know the specifics of the event yet. They don't know where it's going to be held. They don't know how many people are coming. They don't know how many centerpieces they're going to need, because it's their job to help figure that out. So your job as an attorney is to draft as detailed as possible of an agreement while thinking critically about the possible challenges that might come up and the possible issues that might arise for that vendor. So you're going to want to nail down things like how many hours of a wedding planner is going to be on site. Up front, you can say, for the wedding, on the event day, the planner will be there 8 hours. Any overages are going to be X number of dollars an hour. Any time beforehand is going to be X number of dollars. So, because that's something that you can nail down beforehand. You're going to want to make sure that you talk about the number of meetings that the wedding and event vendor is going to have with the couple beforehand. Sometimes you have couples who are a little bit, who are laid back. Sometimes you have couples who are going to be a little bit more involved and are going to want someone to be with them every step of the way and hold their hand. So just like the kind of clients that we have, whereas some require more energy than others, the planners are going to have clients that require more energy than others. So you're going to want to make sure you talk about, planner will meet with you 6 months out, 3 months out, the day before to go over everything, so that you don't have clients kind of abusing the number of times your client, the wedding planner, will meet with them. A lot of times this isn't known up front, but our clients need to have a grasp on the estimated number of tables, of centerpieces, of guests that are going to be at the wedding in order to give their quotes for pricing. So we're going to want to put that in our contracts, even if our client's the couple, doesn't know for sure. You're going to want to make sure that there's some sort of ballpark, because the last thing we would want for our clients is to have a situation where they only thought it was going to be a wedding for 50 people, and then so they quoted the couple one price, and then to have the wedding end up being 120, 200 people, and our client would then be stuck doing work for a wedding that they only thought was going to be for 50 people and a lot less work for a lot more work, because your planner clients aren't going to be billing hourly for the most part. They're going to be billing in a lump sum, or obviously broken down. They're going to be billing in a flat fee. So you're going to want to think through all the things as a lawyer that we worry about with flat fees and kind of mold it into what these wedding and event vendors would be concerned about, and think about our concerns how that would reflect if we were wedding and event vendors. It's a good way to get into their shoes. Other examples of some things that you may want to nail down up front are if the wedding planner is going to be in charge of getting food, you're going to want to think about travel, which I'll talk about a little later. If the wedding and event vendor, if the couple doesn't have a date already picked out and the wedding planner has a wedding that day and the couple becomes becomes convinced that that is the one day that they need, is the wedding vendor required to find someone else to fill that spot? Those are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about. Another issue that I run across frequently is dealing with house rules of either the venue or the restaurant or the church that the wedding planner is going to be in charge of decorating and in charge of keeping up to date. So a lot of times the couple isn't going to know where their wedding is going to be held, and the the event vendor is going to have to be in charge of helping them find that place. But they may not know all of the rules and regulations involved with renting that space up front. So you can have an event vendor or a wedding planner say, we're going to do all these beautiful swags of flowers, we'll have candles, we'll have this and that, and then when you get the contract from the event venue, it says that you can't do any of that. So you want to make sure that as an event planner, your client is not held to a standard that they can't achieve, and that they maybe talk to a couple about beforehand, and then when they find out they can't do it, the couple might get a little upset. So you want to make sure that there is a clause in your contracts that say that the wedding planner has to work around house rules and is not responsible for any changes that have to be made because of the rules of the venue. Another clause that I think is extremely important is the feed me clause. I do this for wedding planners and photographers especially. Oftentimes they have a very long day. They get up, maybe their contract only says they're there for 8 hours, but part of the time they are getting up, making sure they're there. They're making last-minute modifications to whatever decorations or centerpieces, whatever they need to be doing last minute, and they are going on very little sleep, and they are working a lot longer than 8 hours. So you want to make sure that the bride and groom or whoever is there knows that the wedding planner and the photographer especially need to be fed sometime in that 8 hours. I usually say that in the contract that the couple will provide one catered meal for the event planner and each of their assistants during a time that does not interfere with the duties of the vendor. That usually covers it, and usually makes sure that somewhere, somehow, the planner gets fed, and they're not just run ragged. But it's a little detail like that that's going to make it easier for your clients to do their job and to be successful, and it'll make them appreciate that you're thinking about them in that way. Another thing that I'm seeing a lot more of is travel related to weddings. You have a lot of weddings and events that are on location or in a remote location or far away from where that vendor may be located. And so you're going to want to make sure that you address those travel concerns up front. One of the things that I do is I make sure there is a clause that says anywhere outside of the 00002 zip code will incur a charge of, I think it's 0.57 dollars per mile. Whatever the IRS standard is this year, you're going to want to make sure that's updated every year and remind your clients that needs to be updated yearly. But that way, they're not just driving all over and not getting reimbursed for that. Another way I address this is, especially when the venue, again, is not known at the time that the contract is signed, you won't be able to know where that planner is going to need to stay. You're not going to be able to know if there are accommodations on site for the planner or not. So one of the things I do is say if it's over 2 hours away from the 00000 zip code, the planner will require a 3-star hotel rated on whatever travel website.com as of the date of booking, no more than 30 minutes from the event location. And that's just to make sure that your vendor isn't driving 3 hours before and after the wedding, after working 8 hours, after being up the night before, to make sure that everything is executed correctly. Again, that's just another little thing you can do to make your clients know that you're thinking about them and make their lives easier and make them appreciate you, because when they appreciate you, they send all of their friends to you and they send their friends to you, and it just becomes a constant stream of referral. And if you're speaking their language and if you're making it easy for them to understand, they are going to come back. If you're traveling out of the state or country, a lot of times I'll put in stipends for daily meals, stipends for whatever travel they need to have done, if they need to get a vehicle. Those are things that hopefully would be able to be addressed as soon as possible if they're not already in the original agreement your client has with their clients. But it's nice to have it there just in case, because you're always going to have to travel a little bit. Another thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit later are model releases. I'll discuss this more in depth in the photographer section. However, know that model releases for photographs are not just for photographers. If a wedding planner is using photos from an event to promote their business in advertising or trade, they need to have a model release. Technically, you are using someone's image or likeness for advertising, trade, or promotion, and that requires a release. So make sure your clients know that they need those for the bride and the groom if they're using any of those photographs that are taken. And if they take any pictures of guests at the wedding, the bride and groom or the couple can't just sign away those guests' rights. They need to go get them individually. It's not just some sort of group blanket, okay, you can use all of our pictures. It's something that needs to be signed by those individual people. Or else you are misappropriating someone's likeness, which can incur some pretty heavy fines and costs if that person were to take some sort of action against you. Now, a lot of times wedding vendors are getting those images from a photographer, and usually photographers expect to get those requests. As I said earlier, it's very, very common for wedding and event vendors to work together, and to work together frequently, because every weekend you have a group of people that are going to be getting together and doing either one or more weddings. So photographers often expect to get requests for the pictures they take of a wedding so that a wedding planner or any other vendor can use those images in their portfolio. So it's good to have a standard one-sheet license for your planner to sign off on with a photographer. That gives the planner the right to use those photographs for advertising, trade, promotion in any and all forms of media, so that they can use in their portfolio, on their website, on their social media accounts. One of the things you're going to also want to make sure you carve out in that agreement is the ability to submit those photos to industry blogs and magazines. Those are a huge, huge part of the wedding industry. And those photos of what the planner's done, or the way that the planner set up the space, or the execution of the flowers in the venue are going to be submitted to probably a lot of places, and technically the vendor really needs to have the photographer's permission. So make sure that you get those done and you have one of those to go. A good place to have that just ready to rock and roll is in whatever app you have, so that you can have those, so you're not trying to track down a photographer to get those licenses signed. So just pull out your iPhone or your Android phone or your iPad or whatever and have them sign off on it. And that's just easy, done, over with, then you have that license. You're also going to want to talk to the photographer about having the photographer credit the planner for the execution of the design of the wedding, because a photographer probably wouldn't get great photos if the planner hadn't executed the design the way they had. So a good way to use your leverage as a wedding or event planner to get a license from a photographer, and maybe do so in kind of a trade-off, instead of having to license those images and pay for them, is to make sure that your license says the wedding vendor will get credit as well for the execution and styling for whatever blogs or social media the photographer submits those images to. And that way, when you're in a wedding magazine, you open up a wedding magazine and there's a picture of a beautiful, beautiful, tabletop display or execution of a styling, and someone loves the styling, loves what it is, wants to engage that wedding planner, they would be able to look up that planner instead of just the photographer's tag. So if you write that in your license with the photographer, that whenever the photographer submits it to any sort of blog or industry publication, that they have to give your vendor or your wedding planner credit as well. It's kind of a good way to advocate for your client and make sure that they get the credit that they deserve. Again, liquidated damages, I think, are trickiest for planners because they do a lot of the work beforehand. You're going to want to make sure, like I talked about earlier in the early example, that you're breaking down those payments into kind of a timeline, because what my great fear for them is that if for whatever reason, the contract was in dispute and went in front of a judge, the judge would look at it and say, oh, well, you're the wedding planner for the day. You haven't done anything yet. You don't need to keep 50% of that money. You haven't even executed any of your services yet. You can keep 10%. So what I like to do, again, is break it down into that sliding scale so that there's no question, like, this is the work that I've done up to this point. This is what I'm keeping until this point. This is all the money that you're giving me is compensating me for this year that I've spent answering your emails, talking to you about styling and execution of that styling, talking to you about colors, talking to you about floral arrangements, things like that. And as many wedding and event vendors know, that final day when you're actually there on site at the event, it's probably only 10 to 20% of the effort that goes into working with a couple. So one of the other big things that's not on this slide, but that I kind of work with my vendors, especially my planners, about, is what if the planner can't make it? What if something happens that the planner is ill, or I actually have a planner who is pregnant and wanted to know if she was having pregnancy complications. How do we write this into the contract? That is something that our clients, the couple, is going to want to know as well, because they get very attached to their vendor. It becomes a relationship where they almost become friends, and they want to make sure that that person is there. So one of the things that I tend to put in, is that the event planner is going to do everything they can to get there. And if something happens where they are hospitalized or something happens that they can't make it, that they will refer a vendor of similar experience and of high industry standard to the couple. Usually this clause kind of gives the couple a little bit of a reassurance that if something happens, they will have a planner there and that they won't just be flying solo on their wedding. And the couple really appreciates that in the contract. So that's another thing to consider when you're drafting, just because of the nature of the industry and the concerns that our clients have in that on that day.